have been given not vengeance, but justice.
It was very important to show that the Tim McVeighs of the world were wrong, that we are not a country of tyranny. We are a country of laws and process and rights.
We wanted to have a hearing that was conducted in open court so that everybody would know who this person was and what we were charging him with.
And this was going to be the biggest case in the history of at least Oklahoma and perhaps America. And so it was important for the public to perceive that these persons had good lawyers.
And that only comes if people see a hard-fought battle where people whose job it is to represent the defendant's interests in the best way they can, do the best job that they can to do that.
We then put on evidence that associated the rental of the truck with the defendant, Mr. McVeigh.
Well, I think what we're all looking for is jurors that will answer the questions truthfully and honestly.
We did everything that he would want done in order to raise reasonable doubt as to his guilt. That was our job and our duty, and that's what we embraced.
So if we're not prepared to represent the worst of the worst, then the best of the best can never expect to have their constitutional rights upheld either.
The federal court sitting in a criminal matter ought to be a kind of sanctuary in the jungle.
It was a very strong case, and from the get-go, I think everybody knew this was a case in which justice would prevail.
We always had confidence in our evidence. Now everyone else will have confidence in the evidence in the verdict.
So much is riding on what you do. It's easy in a lot of cases as a litigator to say, well, whatever happens at the end of the case, I'm going home. This is a case you don't leave behind at the office.
Everyone worked 14 to 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, because you never could walk away from the office thinking there might be one more thing you could do.
And while you might have been really dead tired, you didn't stop. You wouldn't stop. You couldn't stop.
We were very, very focused on doing right by the victims. I mean, if you get an acquittal, it's like getting kicked in the teeth all over again. So we did not feel these were cases that we could lose.
What if in a rush to judgment we violated rules of due process and the case was reversed and would have to be retried again? We had to make sure that we were right.
Witness after witness would get on the stand and deliver in a way that we trusted the jury understood, believed them, and it would help support their verdict.
There was that emotion that you felt of just your enormous responsibility, but then there was the human emotion of dealing with the people who were actually victimized by the crime.
They lost total control of their lives, and to the extent that you can give them information and predictability, the more they have a chance to regain some sense of control.
Our office provided lots of emotional support, lots of information.
I guess I just felt like, by wearing that hat, that people from Oklahoma would go, okay, we've got a guy there who's from Oklahoma, who's one of us, who's fighting for us.
You never got a break from the emotion, and that kept the jury emotional, and it kept the courtroom emotional.
I remember Judge Mage looking at me during one of the pretrial conferences because every time they talked about people, I cried. And he looked at me and he said, I will have no tears in front of this jury. You can't do it.
He certainly held everybody's feet to the fire and was just a model of fairness. He was a challenging judge. You had to have your case together. You had to know the facts and the law and be ready to present it.
We heard so many victims say, who paid for my son's death? Who paid for my sister's death? Who paid for my mom's death? Because the only convictions that they had were for the 8 federal officers.
And it became an issue of responsibility in my eyes for Terry Nichols to step up and take responsibility for what he did.
Someone's rights needed to be protected. He needed to get a fair trial. He needed to have counsel that he could trust in.
I remember Judge Taylor and what a wonderful judge he was. I remember the jurors paying attention all the time, really interested in doing their job.
You have to learn that it's the case, it's the facts of the case, and doing justice to the victims that's got to drive, motivate what you do there every day.
I was happy to see that the prosecutors, the defense lawyers, the judges, everyone that I worked with had that same sense of cooperation, the Oklahoma standard, if you will, that was started in the days after the bombing. I was happy to see that that was carried over into the trial process.
You think about Terry Nichols and Timothy McVeigh in the course of how they were treated afterwards. I mean, they hated our government so much, but they've certainly benefited by all the constitutional rights that our government sets forth.
Those feelings of anger I felt on that first day could never be the guiding star of how we go about doing this business. I mean, if it's going to be legitimate, if it's going to stick.
I just think that we all had a job to do. I think we all did that job very well, and that's good for everyone.
Well, a lesson for history is that our system works when the people involved in it are pretty honest.
They consider the government to be the enemy. I looked him square in the eye and I told him, Mr. Nichols, it's ironic that the very government that you profess to hate so much, it's ironic that it's that government that's big enough and strong enough to give you a fair trial.